Joel's Talk with Santa Claus by Eugene Field. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. One Christmas Eve, Joel Baker was in a most unhappy mood. He was lonesome and miserable. The chimes making Merry Christmas music outside disturbed rather than soothed him. The jingle of the sleigh bells fretted him, and the shrill whistling of the wind around the corners of the house and up and down the chimney seemed to grate harshly on his ears. "Humph," said Joel wearily. "Christmas is nothing to me. There was a time when it meant a great deal, but that was long ago. 50 years is a long stretch to look back over. There is nothing in Christmas now, nothing for me at least. It is so long since Santa Claus remembered me that I venture to say he has forgotten that there ever was such a person as Joel Baker in all the world. It used to be different. Santa Claus used to think a great deal of me when I was a boy. Ah, Christmas nowadays ain't what it was in the good old time. No, not what it used to be." As Joel was absorbed in his distressing thoughts, he became aware very suddenly that somebody was entering or trying to enter the room. First came a draught of cold air, then a scraping, grating sound, then a strange shuffling, and then, yes, then, all at once, Joel saw a pair of fat legs and a still fatter body dangle down the chimney, followed presently by a long white beard, above which appeared a jolly red nose and two bright twinkling eyes, while over the head and forehead was drawn a fur cap, white with snowflakes. "Ha ha!" chuckled the fat, jolly stranger, emerging from the chimney and standing well to one side of the hearthstone. "Ha ha! They don't have the big wide chimneys they used to build, but they can't keep Santa Claus out. No, they can't keep Santa Claus out. Ha ha ha! Though the chimney were no bigger than a gas pipe, Santa Claus would slide down it." It didn't require a second glance to assure Joel that the newcomer was indeed Santa Claus. Joel knew the good old saint, oh yes, and he had seen him once before, and although that was when Joel was a little boy, he had never forgotten how Santa Claus looked. Nor had Santa Claus forgotten Joel, although Joel thought he had, for now Santa Claus looked kindly at Joel, and smiled, and said, "Merry Christmas to you, Joel." "Thank you, old Santa Claus," replied Joel, "but I don't believe it's going to be a very Merry Christmas. It's been so long since I've had a Merry Christmas that I don't believe I'd know how to act if I had one." "Let's see," said Santa Claus. "It must be going on 50 years since I saw you last. Yes, you were 8 years old the last time I slipped down the chimney of the old homestead and filled your stocking. Do you remember it?" "I remember it well," answered Joel. "I had made up my mind to lie awake and see Santa Claus. I had heard tell of you, but I'd never seen you, and Brother Otis and I concluded we'd lie awake and watch for you to come." Santa Claus shook his head reproachfully. "That was very wrong," said he, "for I'm so scary that if I'd known you boys were awake, I'd have never come down the chimney at all, and then you'd have had no presents." "But Otis couldn't keep awake," explained Joel. "We talked about everything we could think of, till Father called out to us that if we didn't stop talking he'd have to send one of us up into the attic to sleep with the hired man. So in less than 5 minutes Otis was sound asleep and no pinching could wake him up. But I was bound to see Santa Claus, and I don't believe anything would have put me to sleep. I heard the big clock in the sitting room strike 11, and I had begun wondering if you never were going to come, when all of a sudden I heard the tinkle of the bells around your reindeers' necks. Then I heard the reindeers prancing on the roof and the sound of your sleigh runners cutting through the crust and slipping over the shingles. I was kind of scared, and I covered my head up with the sheet and quilts, only I left a little hole so I could peek out and see what was going on. As soon as I saw you I got over being scared, for you were jolly and smiling like, and you chuckled as you went around to each stocking and filled it up." "Yes, I can remember that night," said Santa Claus. "I brought you a sled, didn't I?" "Yes, and you brought Otis one, too," replied Joel. "Mine was red and had Yankee Doodle painted in black letters on the side. Otis's was black and had Snow Queen in gilt letters. "I remember those sleds distinctly," said Santa Claus, "for I made them specially for you boys." "You set the sleds up against the wall," continued Joel, "and then you filled the stockings." "There were 6 of 'em, as I recollect," said Santa Claus. "Let me see," queried Joel. "There was mine, and Otis's, and Elvira's, and Thankful's, and Susan Prickett's. Susan was our help, you know. No, there were only 5, and as I remember, they were the biggest we could beg or borrow of Aunt Dorcas, who weighed nigh unto 200 pounds. Otis and I didn't like Susan Prickett, and we were hoping you'd put a cold potato in her stocking." "But Susan was a good girl," remonstrated Santa Claus. "You know I put cold potatoes only in the stockings of boys and girls who are bad and don't believe in Santa Claus." "At any rate," said Joel, "you filled all the stockings with candy and popcorn and nuts and raisins, and I can remember you said you were afraid you'd run out of popcorn balls before you got around. Then you left each of us a book. Elvira got the best one, which was The Garland of Friendship, and had poems in it about the bleedin' of hearts, and so forth. Father wasn't expecting anything, but you left him a new pair of mittens, and Mother got a new fur boa to wear to meetin'." "Of course," said Santa Claus, "I never forgot Father and Mother." "Well, it was as much as I could do to lay still," continued Joel, "for I'd been longin' for a sled, and the sight of that red sled with Yankee Doodle painted on it just made me wild. But somehow or other I began to get powerful sleepy all at once, and I couldn't keep my eyes open. The next thing I knew, Otis was nudgin' me in the ribs. 'Get up, Joel,' says he. 'It's Christmas, and Santa Claus has been here.' 'Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!' we cried as we tumbled out of bed. Then Elvira and Thankful came in, not more'n half dressed, and Susan came in too, and we just made Rome howl with Merry Christmas to each other." "If you children don't make less noise in there," cried Father, "I'll hev to send you all back to bed." The idea of asking boys and girls to keep quiet on Christmas morning when they've got new sleds and garlands of friendship. Santa Claus chuckled. His rosy cheeks fairly beamed joy. "Otis and I didn't want any breakfast," said Joel. "We made up our minds that a stocking full of candy and popcorn and raisins would stay us for a while. I do believe there wasn't buckwheat cakes enough in the township to keep us indoors that morning. Buckwheat cakes don't size up much 'longside of a red sled with Yankee Doodle painted onto it, and a black sled named Snow Queen. We didn't care how cold it was, so much the better for sliding downhill. All the boys had new sleds. Leif Dawson, Bill Holbrook, Gum Adams, Rube Playford, Leander Merrick, Ezra Purple, all on 'em had new sleds 'ceptin' Martin Peavy, and he said he calculated Santa Claus had skipped him this year, 'cause his father had broke his leg haulin' logs from the Pelham woods, and had been kep' indoors 6 weeks. But Martin had his old sled, and he didn't hev to ask any odds of any of us, neither." "I brought Martin a sled the next Christmas," said Santa Claus. "Like as not. But did you ever slide downhill, Santa Claus? I don't mean such hills as they have out here in this new country, but one of them old-fashioned New England hills that was made specially for boys to slide down, full of bumpers and thanky barms, and about 10 times longer coming up than it is going down. The wind blew in our faces and almost took our breath away. 'Merry Christmas to ye, little boys,' it seemed to say, and it untied our mufflers and whirled the snow in our faces, just as if it was a boy too and wanted to play with us. An old crow came flapping over us from the cornfield beyond the meadow. He said 'Caw! Caw!' when he saw my new sled. I s'pose he'd never seen a red one before. Otis had a hard time with his sled, the black one, and he wondered why it wouldn't go as fast as mine would." "Hev you scraped the paint off'n the runners?" asked Grassley Goodnow. "'Course I hev," said Otis. "Broke my own knife and Lute Ingram's a doing it. But it don't seem to make no difference. The darned old thing won't go." Then, what did Simon Buzzell say but that, like as not, it was because Otis's sled's name was Snow Queen. "Never did see a girl sled that was worth a cent anyway," says Simon. Well, now that just about broke Otis up in business. "It ain't a girl sled," says he, "and his name ain't Snow Queen. I'm a-going to call it Dan'l Webster, or Oliver Optic, or Sheriff Robbins, or after some other big man." And the boys plagued him so much about that pesky girl sled that he scratched off the name, and as I remember, it did go better after that. "About the only thing," continued Joel, "that marred the harmony of the occasion, as the editor of the Hampshire County Phoenix used to say, was the ashes that Deacon Morris Frisbee sprinkled out in front of his house. He said he wasn't going to have folks breaking their necks just on account of a lot of frivolous boys that was going to the gallows as fast as they could. Oh, how we hated him! And we'd have snowballed him, too, if we hadn't been afraid of the constable that lived next door. But the ashes didn't bother us much, and every time we slid side saddle we'd give the ashes a kick, and that sort of scattered 'em." The bare thought of this made Santa Claus laugh. "Going on about 9 o'clock," said Joel, "the girls come along. Sister Elvira and Thankful, Prudence Tucker, Belle Yoakum, Sophronie Holbrook, Sis Hubbard, and Marthy Sawyer. Marthy's brother Increase wanted her to ride on his sled, but Marthy allowed that a red sled was her choice every time. 'I don't see how I'm going to hold on,' said Marthy. 'Seems as if I would have my hands full keeping my things from blowing away.' 'Don't worry about yourself, Marthy,' says I, 'for if you'll look after your things, I kind of calc'late I'll manage not to lose you on the way.' Dear Marthy! Seems as if I could see you now, with your tangled hair a-blowing in the wind, your eyes all bright and sparkling, and your cheeks as red as apples. Seems, too, as if I could hear you laughing and calling, just as you did as I toiled up the old New England hill that Christmas morning, a-calling, 'Joel! Joel! Joel! Ain't you ever coming, Joel?' But the hill is long and steep, Marthy, and Joel ain't the boy he used to be. He's old and gray and feeble, but there's love and faith in his heart, and they kind of keep him tottering toward the voice he hears a-calling, 'Joel! Joel! Joel!'" "I know. I see it all," murmured Santa Claus very softly. "Oh, that was so long ago," sighed Joel, "so very long ago. And I've had no Christmas since. Only once, when our little one, Marthy's and mine, you remember him, Santa Claus?" "Yes," said Santa Claus, "a toddlin' little boy with blue eyes." "Like his mother," interrupted Joel. "And he was like her, too, so gentle and lovin', only we called him Joel, for that was my father's name, and it kind of run in the family. He wa'n't more than 3 years old when you came with your Christmas presents for him, Santa Claus. We had told him about you, and he used to go to the chimney every night and make a little prayer about what he wanted you to bring him. And you brought 'em, too, a stick horse, and a picture book, and some blocks, and a drum. They're on the shelf in the closet there, and his little Christmas stocking with 'em. I've saved 'em all, and I've taken 'em down and held 'em in my hands, oh, so many times." "But when I came again," said Santa Claus, "his little bed was empty, and I was alone. It killed his mother. Marthy was so tender-hearted. She kind of drooped and pined after that. So now they've been asleep, side by side, in the burying ground, these 30 years. That's why I'm so sad-like whenever Christmas comes," said Joel after a pause. "The thinking of long ago makes me bitter almost. It's so different now from what it used to be." "No, Joel, oh no," said Santa Claus. "'Tis the same world, and human nature is the same and always will be. But Christmas is for the little folks, and you, who are old and grizzled now, must know it and love it only through the gladness it brings the little ones." "True," groaned Joel, "but how may I know and feel this gladness when I have no little stocking hanging in my chimney corner, no child to please me with his prattle? See, I am alone." "No, you are not alone, Joel," said Santa Claus. "There are children in this great city who would love and bless you for your goodness if you but touched their hearts. Make them happy, Joel. Send by me this night some gift to the little boy in the old house yonder. He is poor and sick. A simple toy will fill his Christmas with gladness. His little sister, too. "Take her some presents," said Joel. "Make them happy for me, Santa Claus. You are right. Make them happy for me." How sweetly Joel slept! When he awoke, the sunlight streamed in through the window and seemed to bid him a Merry Christmas. How contented and happy Joel felt! It must have been the talk with Santa Claus that did it all. He had never known a sweeter sense of peace. A little girl came out of the house over the way. She had a new doll in her arms, and she sang a merry little song, and she laughed with joy as she skipped along the street. Aye, and at the window sat the little sick boy, and the toy Santa Claus left him seemed to have brought him strength and health, for his eyes sparkled and his cheeks glowed, and it was plain to see his heart was full of happiness. And oh, how the chimes did ring out, and how joyfully they sang their Christmas carol that morning! They sang of Bethlehem, and the manger, and the babe. They sang of love and charity, till all the Christmas air seemed full of angel voices. Carol of the Christmas morn, carol of the Christ child born, carol to the listening sky, till it echoes back again. Glory be to God on high, peace on earth, good will toward men. So all this music, the carol of the chimes, the sound of children's voices, the smile of the poor little boy over the way, all this sweet music crept into Joel's heart that Christmas morning. Yes, and with these sweet, holy influences came others so subtle and divine, that in its silent communion with them Joel's heart cried out Amen and Amen to the glory of the Christmas time. End of Joel's Talk with Santa Claus by Eugene Field. Recording by Philip Gould.
Marios Giesme by Myronis. Read in Lithuanian. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Marios Giesme. Maria, Maria, skrzyszczałse Lelia, tu świecie augštai ant dangaus. Palengvink vergia, pagalbek žmonija, ja galbek nuo priešo baisaus. Mes, klystantys žmonės, maldaujam malonės. Marija, maldų neatmesk. Tarp verkiančių marių, šių žemiškų karų, nupuolančių stiprink ir vesk. Ir kūno silpnybė, ir žemės puikybė, ir pragaro juoda dvasia. Į prapultį stumia žmonijos draugumą ir žudo galybę tamse. Kaip upės bėgimas, taip mus įpratimas, kas kartą vis traukia žemiaus. Vargai kasdieniniai, kaip pančiai gelžiniai, mus rišti kada bepaliaus. Silpni, nusiminę, tavęs paskutinė, te matome viltį tik tai, tu savo malonę šią žemės karioniai palengvinti galią žinai. Marija, Marija, skaisčiausia lelija, dangaus karalienė šviesi, užstok prieš aukščiausiai, tu žmogų menkiausiai, taip daugiau pas Dievą gali. End of Marios Giesme by Myronis, read by Thomas Peter.
McCarthy's Christmas Eve by Brian O'Higgins. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. McCarthy kept telling himself that it was Christmas Eve, and that he must remember the spirit of the season, and keep his temper and his patience unimpaired. But it was no easy task. He had purchased several of the Christmas numbers, and for days the thought of an enjoyable read before a blazing fire in the parlor had carried him buoyantly through the busy hours at the office, where all was fuss and flurry. But alas and alas for the daydreams of married men. On Christmas Eve there was wood to be chopped, and presents to be packed and posted, and broken toys to be mended. And in the middle of the day Mrs. Mac had implored him to take the children for a walk, while I try and straighten things up a bit. And she looked so weary and worried and rushed that McCarthy had not the heart to refuse. So with a longing look at his cosy parlour fire, he went for a walk. Towards evening things grew quiet. The children were absorbed in their toys. Herself was cooking something in the kitchen. The parlour was as snug could be. The lamp had just been lighted. So McCarthy crept in very softly, pulled an armchair near the blaze, took up his favourite magazine, and in a moment he was the happiest man in that quiet Dublin suburb. Wasn't it just glorious to be at peace with all the world, while other people rushed frantically from shop to shop in the city, seeking everything only what the shops contained? Rat-tat, rat-tat. McCarthy nearly jumped out of his easy-chair, such a start did the sudden and imperative knock at the front door give him. There was a scurry of feet from the kitchen, and a shout of, "The postman again!" when herself opened the door, and in a moment the whole family invaded the parlour, Mrs. Mac armed with a big cardboard box. The latter was quickly opened, while McCarthy sighed resignedly and fondly fingered the pages of his magazine. And then there was a shout of admiration from Willie and Ita and Brian and little Molly, as a beautiful brand-new suit for a boy came into view. "To Brian from his godmother," herself read from a card which lay at the bottom of the box. And then there was another cheer, while the lucky godson danced with delight. Mrs. Mac was thinking hard, and McCarthy, dreading something that was to come, shivered. "He must wear it tomorrow," she said at last, partly to herself, in honour of the day, "and he hasn't a decent hat or cap to wear with it. What are we to do at all?" Her pretty face was puckered, but suddenly it brightened again. "Daddy?" "Yes?" McCarthy was deeply absorbed in his magazine, though he didn't see a word on the page that lay opened before him. "Would you mind running into town and getting a little hat or cap that would suit this? Any sort at all, so long as it's the right size for Brian, and either dark green or brown. You won't be more than an hour away." McCarthy felt that he must rebel at last. He looked up with a frown, but his glance fell upon her eager motherly face, and on the faces of the other four, and he hadn't the heart to say nay. "All right," he said, in a tone of resignation, as he laid the magazine on the table and took the overcoat that she was already holding out to him. It was just at that moment that she remembered, one by one, about 7 other articles that couldn't possibly be dispensed with, and on his way to the tram McCarthy was obliged to repeat the full message over several times, fearful lest he should forget even one item. When he reached the city, the streets were crowded, and every shop was packed, and every shop assistant was blind, deaf, and dumb. McCarthy got a hearing at last, after pushing and shoving and dodging and waiting patiently for half an hour. But when the hats and caps for little boys were shown to him, there was no green or brown in the right size, and the ones that would fit Brian were awful to look at. He knew very well that herself would not dream of putting them over that unexpected suit. So McCarthy was obliged to fight his way towards the street again, and go through a similar struggle in another shop, before the hat he wanted turned up. He was at least another hour pulling and pushing and beckoning to unseeing shop assistants before all the other things herself had asked him to get had been secured, and it was after 10 o'clock when, loaded with tiny parcels, he boarded a homebound tram. The car was crowded, and everybody was armed with packages and parcels of various shapes and sizes, and everybody, though weary and perspiring after their struggles in the shops, seemed pleased that the Christmas shopping was over. The tram was pretty well cleared of its passengers before it came to McCarthy's stopping place, and the only persons to alight at the road in which he lived were 3 countrywomen who had a long tramp before them ere they would reach the quiet district away beyond the township in which were their homes. As McCarthy passed out of the tram, he noticed a small parcel lying on the seat near the spot in which these women had been sitting, and picking it up, he hurried after them. They had already passed out of the arc of light thrown by the big electric lamp, and were making all the speed they could towards home. McCarthy ran until he overtook them, and inquired if they had lost anything, at the same time showing the parcel he had picked up. They counted all their belongings, and they were many, and then recounted them, but they could not see that there was anything missing. "You'll find it's yours," said McCarthy, who was in a hurry to be off. "It was on the seat just where you were sitting. I'm sure it must be yours." "Ah, sure, we'll take it anyway, sir," said one of the women at last. "Seeing somebody's lost it, it's lost, and it's as good to us as anyone else, whatever it is." McCarthy handed over the much-discussed parcel, and the women proceeded on their way, while he turned his steps towards home. Herself was busy upstairs when he arrived, so he flung the parcels on the parlour table, and himself into the easy-chair, feeling, as he inwardly expressed it, just flattened out. She came fussing in a little while later, welcomed him home, thanked him most heartily, and proceeded to examine the contents of each parcel. Everything was there, except the little hat. They searched for it, here, there, and everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found. McCarthy groaned suddenly, as a thought flashed into his brain. The parcel that was the sole cause of his having to go into the city, the parcel that had kept him shoving and shouldering and struggling in 2 shops for nearly an hour, the most important parcel of them all, he had pressed upon those 3 protesting countrywomen half an hour before. McCarthy sat down and said nothing. End of McCarthy's Christmas Eve by Brian O'Higgins. Read by Maria Casper. Molly Ryan's Christmas Eve by W.J. Henderson. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It was bitter cold on the night before Christmas, in latitude 40 degrees 30 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees west. That lies just south of the southern extremity of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and a wild, melancholy, uneasy part of the Atlantic Ocean it is at the best of times. But on a Christmas Eve, with the wind in the northwest, it is a home of desolation. The wind was northwesterly on that particular Christmas Eve, and it was blowing what landsmen would call half a gale, and a sailor a brisk breeze. But the good steamer Astoria, from Liverpool for New York, made no account of a wind which served only to increase the draught in her fire-room, and to enable the engineer to squeeze 6 more revolutions per minute out of the propeller. She was making a fair 19½ knots per hour. When the cold spray came over the weather bow like a discharge of shot made of ice, and slashed the face of the first officer away up on the bridge, he only pulled his cap more tightly down over his ears, hauled the muffler higher around his neck, squinted at the compass card, and gritted his teeth, for he realized that the mighty machine under his feet was letting the degrees of longitude drop astern at a pace which promised the steamship a splendid winter record. "If the captain had only laid the course to the nor'ard," he muttered, "we'd have broken the record. I don't see what he's a bug-a-lugging around here for, as if we was in the middle of summer, with ice on the banks. Keep your eyes in the bowl, you." The last remark was addressed to the man at the wheel. "I thought I seed summat when we riz to the last sea, sir," said the man. "See? You couldn't see your grandmother's ghost on such a night, lad. It's blacker than the inside of a cuttlefish." It was black, and no mistake. Little Molly Ryan, who was among the poor steerage passengers, with her father and mother, wondered if the ship was sailing on the ocean or just on darkness. Molly ought not to have been on deck, and if any sailor had seen her she would have been quickly sent below. But she was such a little body, and she huddled up so closely under the edge of the poop, that no one discovered her. It was so gloomy and close in the steerage quarters. and so many poor women were sick, that Molly had stolen away while her parents were dozing to catch a breath of fresh air. The cold wind seemed to pierce through her, but she was fascinated by the darkness, and after a time she climbed up and sat on the rail, looking at the ghostly foam as it hurled itself against the iron side and swept hissing away under the quarter. Molly was in great danger, but she did not know it. She fancied she saw, away down there in the black and white waters, a beautiful Christmas tree loaded with silver toys that came and went with the foam. Molly had never had a Christmas tree, but she had heard about them, and her fondest hope was that some day she might see one. She leaned far out, looking down into the waters, and of course she could not know how close the bark Mary Ellis was. But the Mary Ellis was altogether too close. She was flying swiftly along before the wind, thundering down into the yawning hollows that flung her bows aloft again with terrible force, and her course was diagonally across the bows of the steamer. Now the skipper of the Mary Ellis was a rough, mean man, and he was trying to save oil, so his side lights were not burning. But those of the steamer were, and the watch on the bark's deck ought to have seen them. But for some reason they did not. So every moment the two ships kept drawing closer and closer together. Just as a steward happened to catch sight of Molly and called to her to get down, there was a sudden outbreak of shouts forward. The first officer immediately called a swift order to the man at the wheel, then sprang to the engine-room telegraph and signalled the engineer to stop. A few seconds later there was a jar, a noise of rending wood, and the Astoria struck the Mary Ellis, a glancing blow on her port quarter, carrying away a part of her bulwarks. At the same instant Molly Ryan fell off the Astoria's rail into the sea. "Man overboard!" screamed the steward, who had reached the spot just a moment too late to catch her. But it takes a long time to stop a steamer going nearly 20 knots an hour, and by the time the first boat was lowered the Astoria was far beyond the spot where Molly went over. Fortunately for Molly, when she came to the surface, half strangled, her little hands struck something hard, which floated. With the strength of despair she climbed upon it. It was the part of the Mary Ellen's bulwarks that had been knocked off in the collision. Still more fortunately for Molly, the captain of the bark, rushing on deck, and hearing the cry, "Man overboard," thought that those words came from someone on his own vessel, and ordered one of his boats lowered away. Groping in the blackness amid the tumbling waters, the crew of this boat found Molly, and took her aboard the bark. "What!" exclaimed the captain, "only a kid? Take her forward, some of you, and see her looked after." And having made sure that the bark was not seriously injured, he returned to his cabin to sleep. "Well, handsome," said a long, lean seaman with a pointed beard, who looked for all the world like a Connecticut farmer, "what you going to do with your wreckage now you got her?" "Thaw her out," said Handsome, as he was called, carrying Molly into the galley. The sailors fell into a general discussion as to how Molly should be treated, for the poor little thing was quite unconscious, and her clothes were freezing on her. However, after a while, she was undressed properly and gently thawed out and put to bed. The sailor called Handsome mixed a warm drink and poured it between her teeth. She gave a little gasp, opened her eyes, and gazed around. "Oh," she muttered, "there isn't any Christmas tree after all." And with that she fainted away again. The sailors looked at one another in solemn silence, till finally one said in a deep bass voice, "Well, if she ain't a-hunting for trees on the southerly end of the Grand Banks." "Well, that's what she's a-looking for, that's what she's a-going for to get," said Handsome, slapping one huge fist into the other. And then he and the other seamen sat down under the forecastle lamp and conversed earnestly in low tones. After several minutes of talk they all arose, and Farmer Joe said, "Handsome, you are considerable pert when you're pert, but there's no time to lose. We must get to work right away." While these rough sailors were at work, little Molly passed from a state of unconsciousness to one of sleep. The big seamen took turns in watching over her. It was not a pretty bedroom that Molly had that night. It was dark and dingy, and full of weird noises of groaning timbers. A swinging lantern threw changeful shadows into all the corners, and showed some very rude bunks in which several sailors off watch were trying to snatch a brief rest. Just behind those bunks, against the stout sides of the bark, the seas burst in booming shocks, and ever and anon there was a noise of falling water overhead. Up and away the bows would soar, and then plunge down again with a sickening rush into the turmoil of foam. But of course the sailors thought nothing of all these things. The forecastle was their home, and they were long ago hardened to its sights and sounds. In spite of everything, Molly slept quite soundly, wrapped in a rough blanket, with a pea-jacket spread over her shoulders, while Handsome and the other sailors were at work with a boat-hook, some small pieces of wood, oakum, and green paint. Whatever it was that they were making, it was strange enough to look at, but their hearts were in their work, and they conversed earnestly in low tones. At last it was finished and set up in a bucket close against the bulkhead, where the lantern shed its fitful light full upon it. "Very good, too," said Handsome, gazing at it, "but it won't do unless it's got something onto it." And then those sailor men went rummaging in their chests, and as they had been voyagers in all parts of the globe, they brought forth some curious toys to put upon the wondrous Christmas tree which they had made. Handsome contributed 3 large shells from the Indian Ocean, a dried mermaid, and a small Hindu god which answered very well for a dolly. Another produced a South African dagger, Chinese puzzle, and 3 brass nose-rings from a South Pacific island. Farmer Joe brought out a stuffed marmoset, an Indian amulet, and a tin-type likeness of himself. A 4th sailor fished out of his chest a beautiful India silk handkerchief and a string of coral. Handsome gravely hung them on the Christmas tree. When all was done, he stepped back and studied the effect. "Very good, too," he said. "Yes," said Farmer Joe, "I guess you couldn't get any sich tree as that to home." At 6 o'clock on Christmas morning Molly awoke. It was still dark, and the lantern's light was but dim. The sailors were huddled back in the corner farthest from their wonderful Christmas tree, which was set up where the child's eyes were most likely to fall on it as soon as she sat up in her bunk. So when Molly awoke, she did sit up and stare straight in front of her with sleepy eyes, trying to collect her thoughts and make out where she was. Gradually she became conscious of the tree. Her eyes opened wider and wider. She almost ceased to breathe for a few moments. Then suddenly she clapped her hands together, and with a little scream of delight cried joyously, "Why, it's a Christmas tree!" The sailors nudged one another, and Handsome could not restrain a chuckle. Molly heard, and looked around at them. A puzzled expression came over her face, and she studied her surroundings for a minute. "Isn't that a Christmas tree?" she asked. "That's what it is," cried English, "and we also is Santa Clauses." "Oh!" exclaimed Molly. "What funny Santa Clauses! I always thought there was only one." "Well, aboard this 'ere bark there is several." "And oh!" cried Molly, clapping her hands and jumping out of the bunk, "what a lot of funny things I've got for my Christmas! I never got much before, but I think I'd rather have my father and mother, please." And then she looked as if she were about to cry. "Don't go for to cry," said Handsome. "I'll sing you a song." "Oh, you are a nice Santa Claus," cried Molly, brightening up. "And all the rest of you Santa Clauses join in with the chorus," said Handsome, standing up and taking a hitch at his trousers, and then he sang: "How the cookie's at the binnacle, the captain's in the galley, and the mateys at the foretop with Sally in our alley, and the steward's on the bobstay and a fishing hard for sole. The wind is up and down the mast, so roll, boys, roll. Roll, boys, never mind the weather. No matter how the wind blows, we'll all get there together. Oh, the captain couldn't steer a ship because he was a Lascar. The cook he had to show the way from France to Madagascar. The ship she couldn't carry sail because she had no rigging. The crew they had to live on clams, 'twas very deep for digging. Roll, boys, never mind the weather. No matter how the wind blows, we'll all get there together. The cook says let the anchors go, the crew says we ain't got 'em. The captain yells then pack your trunks, we'll all go to the bottom. The steward hove the lead, sir, 'twas 3 feet deep, no more. So every mother's son of us got up and walked ashore. Roll, boys, never mind the weather. No matter how the wind blows, we'll all get there together. The land was full of cannibals, which made it interestin'. We told them not to eat us, for we was such bad digestin'. The king comes down to see us, and he sports a paper collar, and he says if we'll clear out of that, he'll give us $50. Roll, boys, never mind the weather. No matter how the wind blows, we'll all get there together. So we fells an inja rubber tree and makes a big canoe about the shape and pattern of a number 20 shoe. The cook he draws a sextant and the captain draws his pistol. One shoots the sun and one the king, and off we goes for Bristol. Roll, boys, never mind the weather. No matter how the wind blows, we'll all get there together. And now we're safe ashore again, we're going for to stay. There's grub to eat and grog for all, and wages good to pay. I'll cross my legs upon a stool and never be a sailor. I'd rather be a butcher or a baker or a tailor. Roll, boys, never mind the weather. No matter how the wind blows, we'll all get there together. At the end of the song, all the seamen stood up, joined hands, and danced around, roaring out what Handsome called the chorus, in such tremendous voices that the captain, who had come on deck, ran to the forecastle hatch to see what was going on. He dropped down among his men so suddenly that they all paused in silence, expecting an outbreak of anger. But the captain slowly realized the meaning of the scene upon which he had intruded, and said, "All right, lads, amuse her, and take good care of her. And when we get to New York, I'll make it my business to find her father." He was as good as his word, and in due time Molly was placed in the arms of her parents, who had been mourning her as dead. It was a joyous reunion, you may be sure. But all the rest of her life Molly remembered her strange Christmas Eve at sea, and her wonderful Christmas tree. End of Molly Ryan's Christmas Eve by W.J. Henderson. Read by Maria Casper.
Old Christmas Returned by Henry Visitelli. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Old Christmas Returned. All you that to feasting and mirth are inclined, come here's good news for to pleasure your mind. Old Christmas is come for to keep open house. He scorns to be guilty of starving a mouse. Then come, boys, and welcome for diet the chief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. A long time together he hath been forgot, they scarce could afford for to hang on the pot. Such miserly sneaking in England hath been, as by our forefathers ne'er used to be seen. But now he's returned, you shall have, in brief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. The times were ne'er good since old Christmas was fled, and all hospitality hath been so dead. No mirth at our festivals late did appear, they scarcely would part with a cup of March beer. But now you shall have, for the ease of your grief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. The butler and baker, they now may be glad, the times they are mended, though they have been bad. The brewer he likewise may be of good cheer, he shall have good trading for ale and strong beer. All trade shall be jolly, and have for relief plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. The holly and ivy about the walls wind, and show that we ought to our neighbors be kind, inviting each other for pastime and sport, and where we best fare, there we most do resort. We fail not for victuals, and that of the chief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. The cooks shall be busied by day and by night, in roasting and boiling for taste and delight. Their senses in liquor that snappy they'll steep, though they be afforded to have little sleep. They still are employed for to dress us, in brief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. Although the cold weather doth hunger provoke, 'tis a comfort to see how the chimneys do smoke. Provision is making for beer, ale, and wine, for all that are willing or ready to dine. Then haste to the kitchen, for diet the chief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. All travellers, as they do pass on their way, at gentlemen's halls are invited to stay, themselves to refresh, and their horses to rest, since that he must be old Christmas's guest. Nay, the poor shall not want, but have for relief plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. Now mock beggar hall it no more shall stand empty, but all shall be furnished with freedom and plenty. The hoarding old misers, who used to preserve the gold in their coffers and see the poor starve, must now spread their tables and give them, in brief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. The court and the city and country are glad, old Christmas is come to cheer up the sad. Broad pieces and guineas about now shall fly, and hundreds be losers by cogging a die, whilst others are feasting with diet the chief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. Those that have no coin at the cards for to play may sit by the fire and pass time away, and drink of their moisture contented and free. My honest good fellow, come, here is to thee. And when they are hungry, full to their relief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. Young gallants and ladies shall foot it along, each room in the house to the music shall throng, whilst jolly carouses about they shall pass, and each country swain trip about with his lass. Meantime goes the caterer to fetch in the chief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. The cooks and the scullion, who toil in their frocks, their hopes do depend upon their Christmas box. There are very few that do live on the earth, but enjoy at this time either profit or mirth. Yea, those that are charged to find all relief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. Then well may we welcome old Christmas to town, who brings us good cheer and good liquor so brown. To pass the cold winter away with delight, we feasted all day, and we frolic all night. Both hunger and cold we keep out with relief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. Then let all curmudgeons who dote on their wealth, and value their treasure much more than their health, go hang themselves up, if they will be so kind. Old Christmas with them but small welcome shall find. They will not afford to themselves, without grief, plum pudding, goose capon, minced pies, and roast beef. End of Old Christmas Returned by Henry Visitelli. Read by Nemo.
On Good Wishes at Christmas by James Hayne Friswell. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. On Good Wishes at Christmas. At Christmas, which is a good holiday for most of us, but especially for that larger and better half of us, the young, there is, as everybody knows, a profusion of good things. The final cause of a great many existences is Christmas Day. How many of that vast flock of geese, which are now peacefully feeding over the long, cold wolds of Norfolk, or are driven gabbling and hissing by the gosard to their pasture, how many of those very geese were called into being simply for Christmas Day? In the towns, with closed streets and fetid courts, where the flaring gas at the corner of an alley marks the only bright spot, a gin palace, there a goose club is held, and there, for a short time, is the resting place, side by side with a bottle of gin, of one of those wise-looking and self-concentrated gobblers, whose name men have generally, and, as we think, unjustly, applied to the silly one amongst themselves. But it is only the profusion of good things, of cakes, puddings, spices, oranges, and fruits, from sunny Italy and Spain, from India and from Asia, from America, North and South, and even from distant Australia. It is not that amongst us, as long ago with the Franklin and Chaucer, that, at this time, "it snowies in our house of meate and drinke." It is not that we have huge loads of beef chines, ribs, sirloins, legs, necks, breasts, and shoulders of mutton, fillets of veal, whole hogs, and pigs in various stages, from the tender suckling to the stiff-jointed father of a family, whose back hair makes good clothes-brushes, and whose head is brought in at college feasts. It is not that the air gives up its choicest fowl, and the waters yield their best fish. Plentiful as these are with us, they are nothing in profusion to the kindly greeting and good wishes that fly about in the cold weather, and that circulate from land's end to land's end. The whole coast of England is surrounded by a general shake hands. The coast-guard on their wintry walks do not greet each other more surely than old friends all over England do. One clasps another, and another a third, till from Dover to London, and so on to York, from Yarmouth on the east to Bristol on the west, from John O'Groat's house at the extreme north to the Land's End, the very toe-nail of England on the south, a kindly greeting, we may be sure, will pass. And a cheerful thing it is, on this day of universal equality, on this day which, "to the cottage and the crown brought tidings of salvation down," to think that we can touch and hold each other with friendly hands all over our land. We all of us shake hands on Christmas Day. Leigh Hunt had a quaint fancy that he had, as it were by lineal descent, shaken hands with Milton. He would argue thus. He knew a man who had shaken hands with Dr. Johnson, who had clasped the hand of him who had shaken Dryden's right hand, who himself had thus greeted Andrew Marvell, who knew Master Elwood, the Quaker friend of Milton, who knew Milton himself, and thus, though our sovereign has her hand kissed, not shaken by her subjects, yet doubtless she will clasp the hands of her children, who, shaking those of others, will let the greeting and the good wishes descend to the lowest on that ladder of society which we are all trying to climb. As for hearty good wishes, spoken in all kinds of voices, from the deepest bass to the shrillest treble, we are sure that they circulate throughout the little island, and are borne on the wings of the post all over the seas. Erasmus, coming to England in Henry VIII's time, was struck with the deep heartiness of our wishes, good, ay, and bad too, but he most admired the good ones. Other nations ask in their greetings how a man carries himself, or how doth he stand with the world, or how doth he find himself, but the English greet with a pious wish that God may give one a good morning or a good evening, good day or good e'en, as the old writers have it. And when we part, we wish that God may be with you, though we now clip it into goodbye. End of On Good Wishes at Christmas, by James Hayne Friswell. Read by Thomas Peter.
Outlanders, whence come ye last? By William Morris. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Outlanders, whence come ye last?
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
Through what green seas and great have ye passed?
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
From far away, O masters mine,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
we come to bear you goodly wine.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
From far away we come to you,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
to tell of great tidings strange and true.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
News, news of the Trinity,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
and Mary and Joseph from over the sea.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
For as we wandered far and wide,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
what hap do ye deem there should us betide?
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
Under a bent when the night was deep,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
there lay 3 shepherds tending their sheep.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
O ye shepherds, what have ye seen?
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
To slay your sorrow and heal your teen.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
In an ox stall this night we saw
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
a babe and a maid without a flaw.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
There was an old man there beside.
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
His hair was white and his hood was wide.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
And as we gazed this thing upon,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
those twain knelt down to the little one.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
And a marvellous song we straight did hear,
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
that slew our sorrow and healed our care.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor.
News of a fair and a marvellous thing.
The snow in the street and the wind on the door.
Noel, 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 we sing.
Minstrels and maids, stand forth on the floor. End of Outlanders, Whence Come Ye Last? By William Morris. Read by Algie Pugg and Newgate Novelist.
The Oxen by Thomas Hardy. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Oxen. Christmas Eve and 12 of the clock. Now they're all on their knees, an elder said, as we sat in a flock, by the embers in hearthside ease. We pictured the meek mild creatures where they dwelt in their strawy pen, nor did it occur to one of us there to doubt they were kneeling then. So fair a fancy few would weave in these years. Yet I feel, if someone said on Christmas Eve, "Come, see the oxen kneel in the lonely barton by yonder coombe our childhood used to know," I should go with him in the gloom, hoping it might be so. End of The Oxen by Thomas Hardy.
Pace de Octavian Goga. Citită în limba română. Aceasta este o înregistrare LibriVox. Toate înregistrările LibriVox sunt în domeniul public. Pentru mai multe informații sau pentru a deveni voluntar, te rog să vizitezi LibriVox.org. pace. Luna-și picură argintul, tremurându-l pe fereastră. Vede atâta împăcare, străjuind căsuța noastră. Lângă pat, zâmbind, stă mama, adormindu-și copilașii. Cămășuță cu mătasă le-a cusut mâna nănașii. Numai moșul povestește, așezat pe fața vetrii. Duminiți de o pildă veche îl ascultă doi cu metri. Dar auzi, cățelul latră, s-aud șopote în ogradă și s-aude, sub o pincă, scârțitul de zăpadă. Și-a curmat povestea moșul și tăcere mută în casă. Osteniți dorm ochelarii pe ceaslovul de pe masă. Licărind o rază atinge geamul ușii de la tindă. De 3 glasuri legănată se înfiripă o colindă. De sub țol ridică fruntea 2 fețe bucălaie. Blând zâmbește din icoană cuviosul Nicolae. Sfârșitul poeziei Pace de Octavian Goga.
Second Landing by Floyd Wallace. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Harari. A gentle fancy for the Christmas season. An oft-told tale with a wistful twistful of something that left the earth with a wing and a prayer. Earth was so far away that it wasn't visible. Even the sun was only a twinkle. But this vast distance did not mean that isolation could endure forever. Instruments within the ship intercepted radio broadcasts and, within the hour, early TV signals. Machines compiled dictionaries and grammars and began translating the major languages. The history of the planet was tabulated as facts became available. The course of the ship changed slightly. It was not much out of the way to swing nearer Earth. For days the two within the ship listened and watched with little comment. They had to decide soon. "We've got to make or break," said the first alien. "You know what I'm in favor of," said the second. "I can guess," said Nathaniel, who had spoken first. "The place is a complete mess. They've never done anything except fight each other and invent better weapons." "It's not what they've done," said Ball, the second alien. "It's what they're going to do with that big bomb." "The more reason for stopping," said Nathaniel. "The big bomb can destroy them. Without our help, they may do just that." "I may remind you that in 2 months 29 days we're due in Willowfors," said Ball. "Without looking at the charts I can tell you we still have more than 100 light years to go." "A week," said Nathaniel. "We can spare a week and still get there on time." "A week," said Ball, "to settle their problems? They've had 2 world wars in 1 generation, and that the 3rd and final one is coming up, you can't help feeling in everything they do." "It won't take much," said Nathaniel. "The wrong diplomatic move, or a trigger-happy soldier could set it off. And it wouldn't have to be deliberate. A meteor shower could pass over, and their clumsy instruments could interpret it as an all-out enemy attack." "Too bad," said Ball. "We'll just have to forget there ever was such a planet as Earth." "Could you? Forget so many people?" "I'm doing it," said Ball. "Just give them a little time, and they won't be here to remind me that I have a conscience." "My memory isn't convenient," said Nathaniel. "I ask you to look at them." Ball rustled, flicking the screen intently. "Very much like ourselves," he said at last. "A bit shorter, perhaps, and most certainly incomplete. Except for the one thing they lack. And that's quite odd. They seem exactly like us. Is that what you wanted me to say?" "It is. The fact that they are an incomplete version of ourselves touches me. They actually seem defenseless, though I suppose they're not." "Tough," said Ball. "Nothing we can do about it." "There is. We can give them a week." In a week we can't negate their entire history. We can't begin to undo the effect of the big bomb." "You can't tell," said Nathaniel. "We can look things over." "And then what? How much authority do we have?" "Very little," conceded Nathaniel. "Two minor officials on the way to Wilberforce, and we run directly into a problem no one knew existed. And when we get to Wilberforce we'll be busy. It will be a long time before anyone comes this way again." "A very long time. There's nothing in this region of space our people want," said Nathaniel. "And how long can Earth last? 10 years? Even 10 months? The tension is building by the hour." "What can I say?" said Ball. "I suppose we can stop and look them over. We're not committing ourselves by looking." They went much closer to Earth, not intending to commit themselves. For a day they circled the planet, avoiding radar detection, which for them was not difficult, testing and sampling. Finally Nathaniel looked up from the monitor screen. "Any conclusions?" "What's there to think? It's worse than I imagined." "In what way?" "Well, we knew they had the big bomb. Atmospheric analysis showed that as far away as we were." "I know." "We also knew they could deliver the big bomb, presumably by some sort of aircraft." "That was almost a certainty. They'd have no use for the big bomb without aircraft." "What's worse is that I now find they also have missiles, range 1,000 miles and upward. They either have or are near a primitive form of space travel." "Bad," said Nathaniel, sitting there, wondering when it's going to hit them. "Nervousness could set it off." "It could, and the missiles make it worse," said Ball. "What did you find out at your end?" "Nothing worth while. I was looking at the people while you were investigating their weapons." "You must think something." "I wish I knew what to think. There's so little time," Nathaniel said. "Language isn't the difficulty. Our machines translate their languages easily, and I've taken a cram course in 2 or 3 of them. But that's not enough. Looking at a few plays, listening to advertisements, music, and news bulletins, I should go down and live among them, read books, talk to scholars, work with them, play." "You could do that, and you'd really get to know them, but that takes time, and we don't have it." "I realize that. A flat yes or no," said Ball. "No, we can't help them," said Nathaniel. "There is nothing we can do for them, but we have to try." "Sure, I knew it before we started," said Ball. "It's happened before. We take the trouble to find out what a people are like, and when we can't help them, we feel bad. It's going to be that way again." He rose and stretched. "Well, give me an hour to think of some way of going at it." It was longer than that before they met again. In the meantime the ship moved much closer to Earth. They no longer needed instruments to see it. The planet revolved outside the vision ports. The southern plains were green, coursed with rivers, the oceans were blue, and much of the northern hemisphere was glistening white. Ragged clouds covered the pole, and a dirty pall spread over the mid regions of the north. "I haven't thought of anything brilliant," said Nathaniel. "Nor I," said Ball. "We're going to have to go down there cold, and it will be cold." "Yes, it's their winter." "I did have an idea," said Ball. "What about going down as supernatural beings?" "Hardly," said Nathaniel. "100 years ago it might have worked. Today they have satellites. They are not primitives." "I suppose you're right," said Ball. "I did think we ought to take advantage of our physical differences. If we could, I'd be all for it. But these people are rough and desperate. They wouldn't be fooled by anything that crude." "Well, you're calling it," said Ball. "All right," said Nathaniel. "You take one side and I the other. We'll tell them bluntly what they'll have to do if they're going to survive, how they can keep their planet in one piece so they can live on it." "That'll go over big." "Advice is always popular." "Can't help it. That's all we have time for." "Special instructions?" "None. We leave the ship here and go down in separate landing craft. You can talk to me any time you want to through our communications, but don't unless you have to. They can't intercept the beams we use. They can't, and even if they did, they wouldn't know what to do with our language. I want them to think that we don't need to talk things over." "I get it. Makes us seem better than we are. They think we know exactly what we're doing, even though we don't. If we're lucky, they'll think that." Ball looked out of the port at the planet below. "It's going to be cold where I'm going. You too. Sure we don't want to change our plans and land in the southern hemisphere? It's summer there." "I'm afraid not. The great powers are in the north. They are the ones we have to reach to do the job." "Yeah, but I was thinking of that holiday you mentioned. We'll be running straight into it. That won't help us any." "I know. They don't like their holidays interrupted. It can't be helped. We can't wait until it's over." "I'm aware of that," said Ball. "Fill me in on that holiday. Anything I ought to know. Probably religious in origin. That so?" "It was religious a long time ago," said Ethaniel. "I didn't learn anything exact from radio and TV. Now it seems to be chiefly a time for eating, office parties, and selling merchandise." "I see. It has become a business holiday." "That's a good description. I didn't get as much of it as I ought to have. I was busy studying the people, and they're hard to pin down." "I see. I was thinking there might be some way we could tie ourselves in with this holiday, make it work for us." "If there is, I haven't thought of it." "You ought to know. You're running this one." Ball looked down at the planet. Clouds were beginning to form at the twilight edge. "I hate to go down and leave the ship up here with no one in it." "They can't touch it. No matter how they develop in the next 100 years, they still won't be able to get in or damage it in any way." "It's myself I'm thinking about. Down there, alone." "I'll be with you, on the other side of the earth." "That's not very close. I'd like it better if there were someone in the ship to bring it down in a hurry if things get rough. They don't think much of each other. I don't imagine they'll like aliens any better." "They may be unfriendly," Ethaniel acknowledged. Now he switched a monitor screen until he looked at the slope of a mountain. It was snowing, and men were cutting small green trees in the snow. "I've thought of a trick. If it saves my neck, I'm for it." "I don't guarantee anything," said Ethaniel. "This is what I was thinking of. Instead of hiding the ship against the sun, where there's little chance it will be seen, we'll make sure that they do see it. Let's take it around to the night side of the planet and light it up." "Say, pretty good," said Ball. "They can't imagine that we'd light up an unmanned ship," said Ethaniel. "Even if the thought should occur to them, they'll have no way of checking it. Also, they won't be eager to harm us, with our ship shining down on them." "That's thinking," said Ball, moving to the controls. "I'll move the ship over where they can see it best, and then I'll light it up. I'll really light it up." "Don't spare power." "Don't worry about that. They'll see it. Everybody on Earth will see it." Later, with the ship in position, glowing against the darkness of space, pulsating with light, Ball said, "You know, I feel better about this. We may pull it off. Lighting the ship may be just the help we need." "It's not we who need help, but the people of Earth," said Ethaniel. "See you in 5 days." With that he entered a small landing craft, which left a faintly luminescent trail as it plunged toward Earth. As soon as it was safe to do so, Ball left in another craft, heading for the other side of the planet. And the spaceship circled Earth, unmanned, blazing and pulsing with light. No star in the winter skies of the planet below could equal it in brilliancy. Once a man-made satellite came near, but it was dim and was lost sight of by the people below. During the day the ship was visible as a bright spot of light. At evening it seemed to burn through the sunset colors. And the ship circled on, bright, shining, seeming to be a little piece clipped from the center of a star and brought near Earth to illuminate it. Never, or seldom, had Earth seen anything like it. In 5 days the 2 small landing craft that had left it arched up from Earth and joined the orbit of the large ship. The 2 small craft slid inside the large one, and doors closed behind them. In a short time the aliens met again. "We did it," said Ball exultantly as he came in. "I don't know how we did it, and I thought we were going to fail, but at the last minute they came through." Nathaniel smiled. "I'm tired," he said, rustling. "Me too, but mostly I'm cold," said Ball, shivering. "Snow, nothing but snow wherever I went. Miserable climate, and yet you had me go out walking after that first day." "From my own experience, it seemed to be a good idea," said Nathaniel. "If I went out walking one day, I noticed that the next day the officials were very much more cooperative. If it worked for me, I thought it might help you." "It did. I don't know why, but it did," said Ball. "Anyway, this agreement they made isn't the best, but I think it will keep them from destroying themselves." "It's as much as we can expect," said Nathaniel. "They may have small wars after this, but never the big one. In 50 or 100 years we can come back and see how much they've learned." "I'm not sure I want to," said Ball. "Say, what's an angel?" "Why?" "When I went out walking, people stopped to look. Some knelt in the snow and called me an angel." "Something like that happened to me," said Nathaniel. "I didn't get it, but I didn't let it upset me," said Ball. "I smiled at them and went about my business." He shivered again. "It was always cold. I walked out, but sometimes I flew back. I hope that was all right." In the cabin Ball spread his great wings. Renaissance painters had never seen his like, but knew exactly how he looked. In their paintings they had pictured him innumerable times. "I don't think it hurt us that you flew," said Nathaniel. "I did so myself occasionally." "But you don't know what an angel is?" "No, I didn't have time to find out. Some creature of their folklore, I suppose. You know, except for our wings, they're very much like ourselves. Their legends are bound to resemble ours." "Sure," said Ball. "Anyway, peace on earth." End of Second Landing by Floyd Wallace.
The Streets at Christmas Time by The Oldest Inhabitant. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Old Father Christmas is a great receiver of goods. Seated on his throne at this season, he receives the offerings of his subjects, droves of oxen, of sheep, and of pigs, flocks of geese and turkeys, men and carts laden with all descriptions of game in season, carts of fish, baskets of fruits and vegetables, barrels of ale and wine, all are proceeding to the feet of the King of Good Cheer. Boys and girls are rushing pell-mell from school, delighted at the prospect of catching a glimpse of his jolly and kindly face. For a few weeks before Christmas, the streets of London begin to assume a new aspect. It is not in Regent Street or Oxford Street or the fashionable streets where linen drapers, jewelers, and other traders who administer to fashion and to all the wants and adornments of the outward man or woman reside, that the change is perceptible. Such streets are uniformly cheerful, such shops are always luxuriant, and always display to the greatest possible advantage the commodities upon which their owners thrive. To them all seasons are alike. Christmas and midsummer, spring or autumn, sees them equally attractive. The jeweler's shop is splendid of necessity. The mercer but changes from muslins and cottons to silks and satins, and from these to woolen textures and furs, according to the season. But it is in the minor streets, inhabited by dealers in eatables of all kinds, that the approach of Christmas is manifested by outward and visible signs, about which there can be no mistake. Regent Street is too proud to show any symptoms of rejoicing at Christmas, but more homely Tottenham Court Road puts on a new face for the occasion, and decks herself out with attractions never thought of at any other time. Oxford Street would scorn to be too Christmas-like, but her tributary streets on either side, except those sombre and highly respectable streets in which there are no shops, look upon Christmas as an era, and rejoice accordingly. The immense increase of population in London has not only led to the multiplication of these signs of Christmas, but to a greater competition among shopkeepers to attract notice. London is not merely a city, it may be called a nation. Any one who would wish to examine the manners and customs of its people could have no better opportunity for the purpose than Christmas. It is to be questioned whether he could have any so good. Formerly, say 30 or 40 years ago, ingenuity was not much taxed to tempt the purchasers of good things. People knew it was Christmas without being told so by advertisements, and knew where to go for the commodities they required to celebrate the festival, without any announcement by placard or handbill. But year after year, up to the present period, the rivalry of business consequent upon the immense number of streets opened up in all quarters, and the establishment of thousands of new shops in almost every parish, the old shopkeepers have been gradually compelled to resort to something like publicity to preserve their custom. Among shops, those of the butchers stand preeminent, and give us prospects not alone of the good feeling for which December is famous, but of the good lighting that we may expect in January and February. Old Father Christmas has a capacious stomach, and the maw of London, not easily filled at any time, becomes all but insatiable towards the close of the year. The droves of oxen in the streets, a nuisance which has antiquity in its favour, but nothing else, increase in numbers and in the bulk of the animals that form them. The future dinners as well as the future candles of the million wend their way to Smithfield in all but countless multitudes. The butchers' shops soon give evidence of the new demand that is certain to spring up. Beef rises 20% in value, and mutton at a somewhat smaller ratio, as soon as the carcasses of prize animals are displayed in the great thoroughfares of the people. Prince Albert's oxen and the Earl of Leicester's sheep, or other animals bred by celebrated agriculturists, are exhibited, the oxen in portions and the sheep whole, with labels upon them, pointing out to the admiring crowds that gather around the shops, the place where, and the owner by whom, they were fed, as well as the amount of prize they obtained. In many instances the carcasses are adorned with ribbons or wreaths, and in almost all cases with sprigs of holly. It is a glorious time for the butchers of London. There is a vastly increased supply, and there is a vastly increased demand, and these tradesmen contrive, upon what principle is a mystery of London never thoroughly explained, to make an extra profit of both circumstances. Suet, which in those quiet and ordinary times when suet is neither abundant nor scarce, fetches 8d. a pound, rises to a shilling when all the world is bent upon making plum pudding. Happy sometimes is the housewife that can obtain it even at that price, but it is not only in meat. There is in fact a general rise in the price of all agricultural produce at this time. Butter, for which it cannot be supposed there is any extra demand or any diminished supply at Christmas, is an instance of it. The price is increased by 2d. or 3d. a pound, as every housekeeper knows, although she may not be able to account for it on any known principles either of political or domestic economy. The reason may be that the butterman, having to pay an extra sum to the butcher, takes it out of the pockets of the public. The butcher too may plead that he has to pay extra to the agriculturalist for the flesh that Londoners will consume, so that the farmer and grazier, after all, may be the grand recipients of the profits or the plunder of Christmas. Beef-eating London must admit, even although it grumble, the infliction, it is to be feared, is wholly irremediable. Next to the butchers' shops, the porkmen's, the poulterers', and the dealers in game are the most crowded with the future good cheer of the London nation. If the streets of the metropolis give unpleasant evidence of the living beef and mutton that are to be offered up at the shrine of old Father Christmas, they give evidence equally strong, and a vast deal more pleasant, of the old gentleman's capabilities in the way of game and poultry. The porkmen may be passed over; they share the good fortune of Christmas like their neighbors; but the dealers in domestic poultry and in game of all descriptions reap a more abundant harvest, and offer more tempting inducements for the expenditure of the million. The family that never taste game or poultry at any other period of the year indulge themselves in it at Christmas; and chickens, geese, and turkeys, dead and alive, are dispatched to the metropolis to help in the honours of Christmas, in numbers commensurate with the magnitude of the city and the joviality of the occasion; while poultry which is bought has its thousands and tens of thousands of purchasers, game, which is given away, has also its thousands and tens of thousands of grateful recipients. Blessed is the London family that has friends in the country. Blessed at Christmas time is he who has a relative or friend who loves sport, and who, knowing how to enjoy his sport, knows quite as well how to cultivate friendship and render relationship agreeable. To him comes the welcome present from the fields, the moors, or the mountains; and for him the railways bear the welcome gifts from all quarters of the land. This large portion of the Christmas consumption of the metropolis does not grace the shops. It is only to be seen in its transit from the railway station to the houses of the grateful recipients; but a portion equally large finds its way to the dealers. In the days of stage and mail coaches it was a pleasant sight to see how picturesquely they were loaded; but the railway, which does more business, does it without a tithe of the display. All game is not given away; would it were! But a goodly share of it becomes merchandise, and is set forth with tempting beauty in the shops. The butchers' shops may be disgusting, and they are so to all who think upon the subject, which however the majority of man and womankind do not; but the shop of the dealer in game cannot be considered repulsive. The victims of our appetite which he supplies are not always stripped of their beautiful plumage, and the pheasant dead is only less lovely than the pheasant alive. Even poor Puss the hare, with her warm jacket on, suggests no ideas akin to those which are felt on the contemplation of the joints that hang from the rafters of the butcher's shop. Mais ne revenons pas à nos moutons. But far more attractive than those of the game dealer are the shops of the grocers. The grocers look upon Christmas as their peculiar time, and they take all due pains to set themselves forth in their fairest trim. Neither do they take such advantage of the day as the dealers in home agricultural produce. The grocers provide large and abundant stores of raisins, currants, spices, and preserved fruits, and put no additional price upon them. On the contrary, they often ask less for their wares than at other seasons, a piece of good generalship on their parts, which our friends, the flesh dealers, might imitate with advantage to themselves as well as to the public. The grocers are not greedy. They encourage the manufacture of pudding. Their pleasant and wholesome shops, which meet the eye in all our great thoroughfares, are shrines to which the devotees of Christmas pay a willing visit. Many are their devices to attract notice. Sometimes a flag is displayed from the first floor windows, or the whole front of the house is beplastered with placards announcing the arrival of millions of pounds of currants and raisins, all for the use of the pudding-loving people, and to be obtained within at prices defying competition. One placard, exhibited a few years ago by a grocer, was in the form of a playbill, announcing the production of a new pantomime, to be called Harlequin Peel, or the Magic Pudding. This was not intended as a political sneer at a great statesman, though at first glance it would seem suggestive of such an idea. It was simply a social and domestic affair to attract customers. Sometimes the grocer gives his customers the additional attraction of a pictorial pudding in his window, with the figure of a sturdy John Bull, surrounded by his family, cutting into the dainty. His face is redolent of good humor, and a scroll issuing from his mouth informs all men, sometimes in a couplet of choice doggerel, that the plums and spices of which that pudding was compounded were bought at Mr. Snooks' or Mr. Jones's, or whatever the name may be of the enterprising trader. Very often a long string of rhymes, almost as good as those remarkable lyrics with which Mr. Moses and his poets amuse the public, is printed in large type and affixed to the grocer's doorpost that all who run may read. Indeed, of late years, the majority of grocers in crowded streets think it necessary to become poetical. "There's a good time coming, boys," said one effusion of the kind a few years ago. "There's a good time coming. Raisins will be cheap at Robinson's," while a rival grocer on the other side of the way put up a placard with the more delightful announcement, "The good time has come, boys. Raisins are cheap at Smith's." The grocers and the keepers of those compound establishments, half grocers and half Italian warehouses, have of late years very much increased their trade by large importations of preserved fruits. The English, as a people, do not excel in this manufacture, but the French and Italians, who have long been famous for it, improve in it every year. The English demand that has arisen, and which seems to go on increasing every year, will doubtless give a further impetus to their ingenuity. It is worth while to spend a few hours in the shop of a large importer of these elegant articles, not merely for the sake of the fruits themselves, crystallized and uncrystallized, but for a sight of the boxes in which they are packed. The French prints used for the purpose have long been celebrated for their beauty and fancy, and the boxes in which plums and those delicious little oranges known as chinoises are packed, are worth preserving for their own sakes, after the fruit has been consumed. Some of the larger receptacles are fit to convert into work boxes, after they have served their original intention, and many are prepared with a view to such a purpose. In these times it might be worth the while of capitalists to devote their attention to the home manufacture of these articles, and also to the preservation of fruits. Sugar is as cheap in England as in France, and there is no reason why jams and marmalade, good as they are, should be the sole products of English industry as regards the preservation of fruit. The most pleasing, as well as the most common, symptom of Christmas in the streets is the holly displayed in shops of every kind wherever eatables or drinkables are sold, and which is almost invariably to be seen at kitchen windows for a week or two before and after Christmas Day. Love in the kitchen could not prosper without the holly, and the policeman in search of affection or of cold mutton would think the kitchen of his fair friend unseasonable in its appearance, if the sprigs of dark green, intermingled with the bright red berries, were absent from the window. The holly cart, of which a most admirable representation is given in our engraving, is also a pleasant sight in the streets, either of the outskirts of the metropolis, as represented by the artist, or of the dense heart of the old city. Holly is a great article of commerce at Christmas time, and yields a good profit both to those who cultivate it and those who vend it in the streets. Never was it more in request than it is now. Never may it be less sought after, as the verdant symbol of the loving kindness of the season. There is one other aspect of the streets of London at Christmas which requires notice. The public heart being open at Christmas, beggars usually venture out with more certain hope of our charity than at other times. Nor is their hope disappointed. To say nothing of the carol singers, who seem to look upon themselves as privileged for the sake of the old familiar chant which they musically or unmusically pour into our ears, and who, of all ages and of both sexes, swarm in every street, in numbers of which an accurate estimate would convey a somewhat alarming idea of the poverty of London. Troops of unmusical beggars make their appearance in the streets. Ireland evidently contributes a large portion to this multitude of misery, and the mind is driven to reflect, amid the gaiety and joviality of the time, not only upon the pauperism of that unhappy land, but of the pauperism of this, which is made more wretched by the influx of these interlopers. The pauperism of England amounts to 1,400,000 people. The Irish vagrants that come over to take their chance amongst us cannot account to many less than 300,000, and possibly they amount to many more, forming an aggregate of 1,350,000. When we fancy that this is almost equal to the whole population of London, Westminster, Lambeth, Southwark, Finsbury, Marylebone, the Tower Hamlets, Kensington, Hammersmith, Greenwich, and Woolwich, and when we attempt to realize to our mind how vast a multitude this is, and how fearful it would be if it were all congregated together in one place, we are compelled to ask if there be not something radically wrong in our civilization, which not only permits the growth of such a sore in the body politic, but which actually favors its growth. Let the minds of our great thinkers be directed to it. The chief difficulty of a time not far distant will be the existence and maintenance of this immense standing army of poverty. If there ever be a time when it is the duty of individuals to attempt to relieve it, that time is Christmas. At a period of feasts, when the paupers in the Union workhouses are embraced in the large circle of our sympathies, and cared for a little more liberally than usual, let us draw a circle around the circle and include within it the beggars in the streets. It may be wrong, as a rule, to encourage street beggars by donations of any kind, but Christmas is an exceptional period, and though possibly in being charitable to all, we may be charitable to many worthless persons. The good will and the good day will consecrate the deed. At least, although political theorists may dissent, and although the man who paid a very heavy poor's rate yesterday may see reason to be unconvinced, such is the opinion until Christmas has passed. Of the oldest inhabitant. End of The Streets at Christmas Time by the Oldest Inhabitant.
Superstitions Regarding Christmas Day by Henry Visitelli. Read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Superstitions Regarding Christmas Day. The following poems are, perhaps, more curious than interesting. They afford, however, some idea of the superstitious dread with which the advent of Christmas Day must have been regarded in these early times, not merely by the vulgar, but by all classes of our forefathers. For the Francis Moores and Raphaels of the 15th century found even kings willing believers in their extravagant predictions. From the allusion in each verse of the first poem to the risk that those who steal subject themselves to, one would almost suppose thieving to have been the fashionable vice of the age, practised alike by both rich and poor, and that there was great need of such injunctions against it. Both of these poems are from the same Harleian MS in the British Museum. 1. Lordings, all of you I warn, if the day that Christ was born fall upon a Sunday, the winter shall be good, I say, but great winds aloft shall be, the summer shall be fair and dry. By kind skill and without loss, through all lands there shall be peace, good times for all things to be done, but he that stealeth shall be found soon. What child that day born may be, a great lord he shall live to be. If Christmas Day on Monday be, a great winter that year you'll see, and full of winds both loud and shrill, but in the summer, truth to tell, stern winds shall there be and strong, full of tempests lasting long, while battles they shall multiply, and great plenty of beasts shall die. They that be born that day I ween, they shall be strong each one and keen. He shall be found that stealeth aught, though thou be sick thou diest not. If Christmas Day on Tuesday be, that year shall many women die, and that winter grow great marvels. Ships shall be in great perils. That year shall kings and lords be slain, and many other people near them. A dry summer that year shall be, as all that are born therein may see. They shall be strong and covetous. If thou steal aught, thou losest thy life, for thou shalt die through sword or knife. But if thou fall sick, it is certain thou shalt turn to life again. If Christmas Day, the truth to say, fall upon a Wednesday, there shall be a hard winter and strong, with many hideous winds among. The summer merry and good shall be, and that year wheat in great plenty. Young folk shall die that year also, and ships at sea shall have great woe. Whatever child that day born is, he shall be doughty and gay, I wis, and wise and crafty also of deed, and find many in clothes and bread. If Christmas Day on Thursday be, a windy winter you shall see. Windy weather in each week, and hard tempests strong and thick. The summer shall be good and dry, corn and beast shall multiply. That year is good lands for to till, kings and princes shall die by skill. If a child that day born should be, it shall happen right well for thee. Of deeds he shall be good and stable, wise of speech and reasonable. Whoso that day goes thieving about, he shall be punished without doubt. And if sickness that day betide, it shall quickly from thee glide. If Christmas Day on a Friday be, the first of winter hard shall be, with frost and snow and with great flood, but the end thereof it shall be good. Again, the summer shall be good also. Folk in their eyes shall have great woe. Women with child, beast, and corn shall multiply, and be lost none. The child that is born on that day shall live long, and lecherous be alway. Who stealeth aught shall be found out. If thou be sick, it lasteth not. If Christmas Day on Saturday fall, that winter's to be dreaded by all. It shall be so full of great tempest, that it shall slay both man and beast. Great store shall fail of fruit and corn, and old folk die many a one. What woman that day of child doth travel, she shall give birth in great peril. And children born that day, by faith, in half a year shall meet with death. The summer shall be wet and ill. Thou shalt suffer if thou aught steal. Thou diest if sickness do thee take. 2. If Christmas Day on the Sunday be, a troublous winter ye shall see, mingled with waters strong. Good there shall be without fable, for the summer shall be reasonable, with storms at times among. Wines that year shall all be good, the harvest shall be wet with flood. Pestilence fall on many a country, ere that sickness shall have passed, and while great tempests last, many young people dead shall be. Princes that year with iron shall die, there shall be changing of many lords high. Amongst knights great debate, many tidings shall come to men, many wives shall be weeping then, both of poor and great estate. The faith shall then be hurt truly, for divers point of heresy, that shall then appear, through the tempting of the fiend, and divers matters unkind shall bring great danger near. Cattle shall thrive, one in the other, save oxen, they shall kill each other, and some beast they shall die. Both fruit and corn will not be good, apples will be scarce for food, and ships shall suffer on the sea. That year on Monday, without fearing, all things well thou mayst begin, they shall be profitable. Children that on this day are born, in faith shall mighty be and strong, of wit full reasonable. End of Superstitions Regarding Christmas Day by Henry Visitelli. Read by Nemo.